It's now my pleasure to hand you over to the man that keeps TREENET honest. Well, actually, keeps me honest, I think. TREENET's treasurer, Darryl Gobbett. Darryl's going to introduce a research project he initiated, and with the help of a highly subsidised research intern project, it was brought to fruition. Over to you, Darryl.
The research paper, Putting a Dollar Value on Urban Forest Benefits, came about as part of member feedback and the recent strategic plan outcomes that TREENET should become more focused on education and research regarding trees in the urban environment. The focus of the paper reflected our view that increasingly local authorities and utilities often viewed the urban forest as contributing only to costs to infrastructure and other hard assets, impeded urban consolidation and represented health risks, etc. We therefore thought it would be a valuable contribution to the membership, the policymakers and the broader community to have a peer-reviewable quality paper commissioned to review recent literature on the various benefits of the urban forest with a focus on quantifiable financial and economic benefits. I now introduce Kirrilie Rowe, PhD designate, the lead author of the paper. Kirrilie recently completed her PhD looking at how communities can reduce carbon dioxide emissions from their use of electricity. Kirrilie has worked as a hydrogeologist, environmental scientist, is a mother and has a variety of passions relating to communities and urban nature.
Thank you, Darryl, and thank you, TREENET, for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to investigate such a fascinating topic. And many people think this is a fascinating topic, as shown by the number of studies that have been published. So just to give you a quick idea of how many studies are being done, here I'm showing you the search terms we used in just one database to find all the articles which had to contain the word urban, as well as either forest or trees or green space, and the words benefits or ecosystem services or value. And it came up with around 20,000 papers, the majority of which have been published since 2015, so in the last 5 or 6 years. But our focus is on the monetary benefit provided by these services, so I restricted the search to those papers which also contain words relating to financial gain. And I'm showing you here that there was still a large number of papers, around 8,000, which mentioned these words, and they were still mostly published since 2015. Now, 8,000 papers is about over 100 times what I could physically achieve in this review. So given the scale of this literature and to capture the most relevant information, I focused on those papers which themselves were a review of other studies. And I limited my literature review to papers published in the last 5 years, which resulted in approximately 200 review papers. And I scanned those abstracts to confirm their relevance to the topic, and the number of papers I actually ended up using was around 60. So what did I find? From those reviews, it came out that there are 5 services provided by urban forests which have been studied the most. And these are listed on the left-hand side of this chart. And just ignore this bottom one here for a moment, which is the structural value of a tree. The service above this structural value is the financial gains from increased property values in streets that have trees, which has been termed the amenity value of the trees. Above this, we have the financial gains from reduced air conditioning use and therefore reduced electricity bills due to the presence of trees near houses, which here is categorised under the term shading. Another service above this is related to the financial gains from trees which intercept rainfall and therefore reduce the volume of stormwater requiring management, which here is labelled stormwater management. Above this, we have financial gains from trees from reduced abatement costs associated with removal of nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide and particulate matter from the air, and that's obviously related to improving air quality. Now, air pollution is an interesting one, and I will talk more about that later. And up the top here, we have financial gains from carbon sequestration by trees and research used shadow prices, which included traded and non-traded carbon prices, as well as control costs. Now, these 5 services provided by urban forests are ongoing, year after year, day after day. Many of you will have used the Burnley method or similar methods for valuing a tree. And these methods are largely based on the structural properties of a tree, like its species, its height, its trunk volume, its form, its life expectancy, location, and so forth. What this figure here does is to provide you with a simplistic diagram just to give you a feel for the additional monetary value that can be attached to the base value of a tree. So it's on top of such base valuations, such as the Burnley valuation. So, for example, say you had an established 40-year-old tree that someone wanted to remove, and it had a lifespan of 60 or 100 or more years. The base structural value of that tree's existence may be calculated using something like the Burnley method, but you will be replacing that tree with a sapling. And a sapling is not going to be able to provide the services, the ongoing services, that a 40-year-old tree can. So let's be simplistic and say that the sapling will have to reach 20 years of age before it will be able to provide the same services as a 40-year-old tree. So that means you will have 20 years of lost services if you remove that 40-year-old tree. So, for example, let's say the base value of a tree calculated using the Burnley method was $3,500, and there it is there in blue, which is very conservative and is most likely much higher than that. Based on the literature, amenity values for trees, based on property prices alone, ranged up to around $250 per tree per year, but we've lost 20 years of that service. So $250 each year for 20 years comes to around $5,000. So we can add in that value to the tree's value. Similarly, it's been found that values for services relating to shading ranged up to around $250 per tree per year. So 20 years of lost service will come to another $5,000. So we can add that on to the value of the tree here, which is in grey there, and so forth. So for lost values over 20 years relating to stormwater management, we can add in that value, relating to improved air quality and relating to carbon sequestration, we can add those values in. And you can see how much more valuable the tree actually is than its base structural value. And these are only 5 services that trees provide. I'm about to show you now the number of other services that trees provide. But although much of the research done on these services do have a dollar value attached to the service, it's not calculated in a way which allows us to have a value per tree per year. So I'll discuss them separately, and that's why they hadn't been included in this diagram. So the first one I'll talk about is human productivity. It's been shown that students who can view and observe nature during high school hours have higher test scores, higher graduation rates, and a greater intent to go on to tertiary studies, and a reduced likelihood of becoming criminals. So the improved performance at school can directly benefit both the individual students and society as a whole. In fact, the annual benefit of the increased average income in the US has been estimated at $1.3 billion US, and this would have further economic benefit to the macroeconomy, which has not even been calculated there. Another study noted that viewing nature during brief breaks helped restore and sustain employees' mental acuity throughout the workday, which would also improve productivity, but I couldn't find a monetary value for that. Another benefit related to urban nature is to do with crime. It's been shown that greener neighbourhoods are associated with a lower crime rate. And in fact, one study showed that for cities with a population greater than 500,000 people, $899 million US could be saved in 2012 due to reduced criminal activity due to greening neighbourhoods. Mangroves act to buffer coastlines, and they significantly reduce damage during storm events. For example, cyclone damage for villages in a mangrove shadow have been shown to be approximately only half that, or has been shown to be only approximately half that of villages not protected by mangroves. In one review of the value of mangroves, it reported the average value of coastal protection by mangroves as the equivalent of around $5,000 Australian per hectare per year. Mental health benefits from urban forests is a big one. Mental health presentations in emergency departments have significantly increased since 2004, and over a quarter of them are related apparently to stress disorders. Depression accounts for 4.3% of the global burden of disease and is among the largest causes of disability worldwide. Positive impacts of urban nature, specifically on mental health, have been well documented. One Australian study showed that visits to green space of once a week for only half an hour was linked to a 7% reduction in depression. And given the annual cost in Australia for depression this year was $16.9 billion, this equates to a saving of 1.2 billion Australian dollars. We would all be aware that lack of physical activity can lead to nasty diseases, some of which are cardiovascular disease, diabetes, some types of cancer, and so on. It's been well documented that if people live close to green space, they will exercise more. Reduced healthcare costs in the US due to increased physical activity were calculated to be around $20 million in Sacramento, $69 million in Philadelphia, and a local study here in South Australia calculated a value of around 483,000 Australian dollars if 1% of overweight people increased their physical activity in just 2 streets alone. Urban forests are also known to reduce the number one cause of death in the world, cardiometabolic diseases. A study of close to 47,000 people over 45 years old found a 1% increase in tree canopy was associated with a lower likelihood of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, incident diabetes, and hypertension. And as cardiovascular disease is a major component of healthcare costs, a potential benefit of $1.43 billion is achievable through decreased cardiovascular treatments if people have access to urban nature. Now, this is another big one. I'm sure we all know that air pollution causes health problems, but even brief exposures to fine particulate matter is linked to increased hospital admissions and premature death. There was a case in the UK relatively recently where the death of a 9-year-old girl was attributed to nitrogen dioxide air pollution from traffic, which she breathed in walking to and fro from school every day. But it's also known that pathogens which are known to cause human respiratory diseases can attach themselves to particulate matter in air pollution, and severe smog events in China which caused rapid increases in patient presentations in hospitals were found to be due to this. The benefit resulting from removal of air pollution by trees across the US is reported as being worth $4.7 billion in 2010. So air pollution has been linked with, also been linked with pregnancy-induced hypertension and preeclampsia. But most recently, studies have shown that it is also related to the second cause of death in Australia, which is dementia. These recent studies are showing that all-cause dementia and Alzheimer's type dementia is related to air pollution, particularly fine particulate matter. And at least a doubling in the number of Australians with dementia is predicted over the next 30 years. So if only a small reduction in dementia in the Australian community was achieved, say 2%, this could potentially save Australia between $660 and $980 million. And as you all know, trees reduce air pollution. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD as it's commonly known, is an increasingly diagnosed brain disorder that is often treated with medication. In a US study, it was found that a 20-minute walk by a child in a city park was roughly equivalent to the peak effect of an extended release stimulant medication, which is the most common ADHD medication. So based on the extent of this effect and the cost of the drug, treating ADHD by interactions with urban nature could save between $383 million and $1.9 billion per year depending on whether you are able to replace 5% or 25% of the medication. Birth weight. It's not only correlated with health in newborns, but also ongoing health through childhood and through adulthood. Newborns with low weight often require additional medical care as babies and children. They suffer more diseases as adults and are more likely to have lower IQ and lower income. Higher birth weight has been correlated with greater tree canopy in the US, in Spain, in Germany, and Canada. And the estimated potential savings in the US due to lower medical costs in the first year alone of a newborn's life equals $6.3 million US. And this savings doesn't include the continued impact of low birth weight during childhood or adulthood. Lack of sleep. I think we've all been there, but not sure if you know, it's associated with, and you'll have to hang on a minute, the list is so long here, I need to read it from my notes. It's associated with high risks of coronary heart disease, stroke, diabetes mellitus, obesity, depression, neurodegenerative diseases, inflammation, cardiovascular diseases, metabolic syndrome, injuries, and premature mortality. I think we'll all be going to bed early tonight. So in the US, though, insufficient sleep resulted in a financial loss in 2015, which was the equivalent to 2.28% of GDP. And these losses are predicted to increase. A systematic review of studies on green space and sleep found that people's exposure to green space improved both the quantity and quality of their sleep. In Australia, a study of close to 40,000 people found people living in or near locations with high tree canopy cover were more likely to get better sleep. It would be good to get an Australian dollar value on that too, as with many of the other benefits described here. So there are many services provided by urban forests which have been studied, but as yet not many have applied a dollar value to these services. For example, recently, microplastics have been highlighted as a real problem in the environment. Certain types of green space can capture pollutants from stormwater before it enters aquatic ecosystems, and one study has shown that green space can remove 96% of debris. There has been a significant increase in the number of studies recently done on pollinators in urban ecosystems, but I couldn't find any literature in relation to the economic value of this in relation to urban forests. But, you know, urban forests can help pollinators by increasing native floral abundance, reducing management intensity of the green space, including areas of bare earth, to support ground nesting bees, and increasing green infrastructure to reduce fragmentation and allow pollinator movement. Now, tree and branch failures in severe wind events are routinely negatively highlighted in mainstream media. But the protection from high velocity winds that is provided by trees is rarely, if ever, publicised, even though the windbreak effect is widely known. So wind speeds are significantly reduced on the downwind side of trees, and which is where your house might be. A study in a neighbourhood in Vancouver in Canada reported that removing all the trees there in the neighbourhood could increase wind speeds by a factor of 2. And I'm sure we've all felt like that occasionally on a windy night. I know I have. This same study found that removing all the trees from the buildings in that neighbourhood increased their energy consumption by as much as 10% in the winter and 15% in the summer. And of course, reduced wind velocity creates much more comfortable conditions for people outside or walking along the street. But I couldn't find a dollar value specifically about the service that urban trees provide in reducing the impact of wind. Now, there are more services from urban forests that I don't have time to touch upon here. Biodiversity, for example, is a big one. But I would just like to conclude by saying that although there has been a rapid increase in the number of studies being done on the services that urban trees provide, studies putting a dollar value on these services are relatively rare. It would be good to see more done specifically for Australia, as currently the majority of studies are focused on North America. And while there are a number of values of trees that will never be able to be monetised, such as trees of cultural value, if the services provided by trees do have an economic value, which many of them do, then that value should be included in cost-benefit analyses. And based on research and current trends, this economic benefit is going to be significant. An important focus for research should be to develop methodologies and tools so that these new values can be easily incorporated into valuing trees. So that's all I have for today, and thanks for listening.
Well, fantastic. Look, thank you, Kirrilie. That's just marvellous. Special thanks to Darryl too for kicking off the session. I know that Darryl is very keen to, and he kept questioning these sorts of needs, I suppose, for doing this kind of work, and certainly the literature research. I think we can ask Darryl, be careful what you wish for, but we're glad he did because we scored you. But I wonder whether you've had any misgivings, because I'm sure that when we first started, you were thinking, gosh, how long is a piece of string, or at least how long is a research into urban forest values and benefits? And I think your session has just captured just a whole swag of stuff. And we know that it's only just touching the tips of the trees in some effects in this regard, but it's just been a fabulous synthesis of those things. And we look forward to doing some more work with you in that regard as well. I must let everybody know that as a direct result of Kirrilie's work, it's prompted TREENET to kind of massage eventually its website portal to include more convenient access to this type of literature. So that's under development as we speak, and that's just a fabulous outcome. Kirrilie, I certainly appreciated that when you filtered the level of activity that you needed to necessarily, that you certainly included quite a number of Australian studies as well as the obvious ones that you could pull in from international sources. They certainly correlated with one another in many respects. But I was wondering, I'm not sure if your filtering kind of ended up being biased in some ways, because you've got all these categories that you examined, but there were certainly ginormous benefits, ginormous dollar benefits relating particularly to the health benefits for that social and mental health and well-being. That wasn't really by design, it was kind of by default because there's an enormous amount of activity in that area?
Yeah, no, you're right, Glenn. Really, the studies that I've presented here only just touch on what's available and what the sort of numbers that you could put into something like this. And I was really pleased to see that David and Greg, put in some more local studies about the ecosystem services that urban forests provide as well. That sort of complemented the work that I've done here. But there's no doubt that there's a prolific number of papers or information studies being done now in relation to health and urban forests, which is fantastic, and they are incredibly interesting. And I guess the thing is now is to, a lot of them have put broad dollar values on the benefits, and I guess the trick is to sort of try and bring that down to a more local level.
Yep. And look, I think it's quite clear, though, there is without drilling down to minutiae, the correlation between the cost savings to our taxpayers and to our ratepayers and our personal health and well-being is quite extraordinary. The things that you do if you don't take care of your urban forest. For all those reasons, I think it's just absolutely fabulous. And you also teased out, whilst not all things have been monetised yet, it's clearly in the wings. Your work has certainly gone to the heart of what TREENET is about. And so I'm tremendously excited about what you've done, and congratulations.
Thanks, Glenn.
For doing that. I would like to thank Darryl. With a few technical hiccups. We haven't been able to sort of latch on to Darryl to bring him on board to congratulate him for his prompts, but it's all been fantastic. So thank you, Darryl, and thank you, Kirrilie, and particularly to you folk, our online delegates. I think I might have mentioned before that we had something like 190 folk online before our break. And that's continuing, and certainly the questions are coming in. I've got one here for you. Oh, well, it's a great comment. First of all, great presentation, Kirrilie, is one of the comments I've got.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And then in your studies, has there been any signs of increasing tree infrastructure investment in response to the increase in research or monetary value? I'll read that again. Have there been any signs of increasing tree investment in infrastructure in relation to those values of trees? Perhaps, like the carbon sinks or the value of carbon, for example.
Yeah, I think mostly from what I've read, mostly in North America, there is. And in fact, a lot of the studies concentrated in North America. So there was a call by authors of papers to do more studies in other climates and other countries. And hopefully this investment that is seen in North America sort of trickles out as well into other countries as well. There could well be a lot of stuff being done that I am unaware of. It was only a 6-month sort of study.
Sure.
Yeah, but that's what I've found.
Okay, so look, I'm not sure whether you're able to have a crack at answering this or not, but Robert has asked, do you think with things like the desire for net zero carbon emissions target, let's say in Australia at the moment by 2050, that this might radically increase the value of trees, perhaps, relating again to carbon sinks and so on?
Yeah. Do you know, just from what I've read, I'm not sure. The surprising thing was that a lot of the values like amenity were a lot higher. The financial value of benefits related to amenity and perhaps shading and that, they were a lot higher than carbon sequestration. So I'm not sure about that. Yeah, don't know.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope you're going to enjoy the rest of the sessions throughout the day. Thanks, Kirrilie.
Thanks very much, Glenn.